The hard place, like a wind from Goldland he sweeps by, blown far from his homeland in search of glory and honor. We walk in the garden of his turbulence.
Hello and welcome to Movie Joust. My name is Jesse Nussman, a film critic living here in Atlanta, Georgia. And actually, with me today is not Josh and Jason. This is a special bonus episode. It is an interview I conducted with filmmaker Joshua Oppenheimer about his new film, The End, which is out in select theaters now and will be rolling out to more cinemas over the next couple months. Joshua is a fascinating filmmaker who I have been dying to talk to for years. Most people probably know him for his two acclaimed documentaries, The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, which both documented horrific aftermath of the genocide in Indonesia. His new film is a lot different, and yet, as you'll hear in my conversation with Josh, it is, I think, similar in a lot of the themes that he dealt with in his two documentary features. His new film is a musical, and it stars Tilda Swinton and George McKay and Michael Shannon, and focuses on a family who are living inside the ruins of an old salt mine after some sort of unspecified apocalyptic event. A very, very unusual and kind of unique musical that I don't know, I think it was one of the, I'm still wrestling with a lot of my feelings about it, which is sign of something. So enjoy my interview with Josh, and we all three of us will be back on the mic here in a couple days.
For speaking with me, Josh. I have to say I've been really looking forward to this. I remember seeing your film, The Act of Killing, when I was, I think, a freshman in college, and it just sort of like completely like blew me away, and is in many ways a movie I'm still sort of wrapping my head around how I feel about it all these years later. And I wanted to kind of like begin with sort of like a big, large question, because I think as different as this new film of yours seems to some of your work in the past, I actually found kind of watching it having a lot of similar themes regarding kind of like the way that we as people sort of try to sort of repress the sins of our past, or sort of like the way we try to sort of ignore, maybe just sort of like feel better about ourselves in the world despite kind of all these sort of terrible repercussions to our actions. Is that something that you were maybe sort of conscious of, or has been sort of like a thesis of your work thus far?
Yeah, I think like The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence, the end is a meditation on how we lie to ourselves and the awful consequences of self-deception. So I think that's absolutely right. And I think there's an analogy to be drawn between the dramatizations that Anwar Congo creates in The Act of Killing, where he sort of in response to trauma tries to kind of stage a version of himself that he finds palatable. And my camera is always looking for the cracks where how he really sees himself shines through. I think the musical numbers in the end emerge from these crises of doubt, where the stories, the lies that the characters have desperately clung to so that they can wake up in the morning and face themselves and believe that they're living good lives, despite how traumatized they are and despite the damage that they've done to each other and to the world. Those stories start to break apart, and they reach desperately for new melodies. And the songs are fueled by these and really are these desperate attempts to cobble together a new version of themselves, a new anthem, some new music, so that they can wake up in the morning and look in the mirror and go about their lives. And in that sense, there's a real analogy between those dramatizations and the musical numbers. And it's maybe not an accident either then that two of the dramatizations that we see in the act of killing are musical numbers.
Is that something like these kind of themes and ideas, stuff that like you are thinking about in terms of yourself as watching? Because I felt watching the movie, I was sort of always conscious of myself and sort of like, okay, what are the things that I'm doing out in the world that maybe are having like negative ripple effects, that whether it's interpersonal relationships, whether it's, you know, environmental impact or things like that, and that I'm sort of choosing to kind of brush aside or think about as like, oh, that's not that big of a deal, or you know, what's my one little bit of litter doing or something like that. Like, is that kind of self-reflection something that you're thinking about in terms of yourself as you're making these movies?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the characters are nameless because they're all of us. And, you know, if we can't stop and take stock of our mistakes and where we're heading in the wrong, in the ways in which we're causing harm and heading in the wrong direction, then we cannot change course. We have no possibility other than just continuing right over the edge of the abyss or trashing our capacity for full and meaningful love with the people we're closest to, the people we care about, with the broader human family, and with this yet beautiful planet. I think I love the way you asked the question, because you asked about me. Is it something I'm thinking about? And I think I've always been, and perhaps what motivated me to become a filmmaker is it is it is that I've been fascinated with consciousness, with the nature of consciousness, with how is it. I actually, before I was a filmmaker, I studied physics out of an interest in how material energy could become matter, and matter in turn could become conscious and know itself. And so the idea that we are sort of the universe waking up and coming to know itself is what is maybe the source of something like spirituality for me. And that how we know ourselves, and therefore what we're able to do, is conditioned by the stories we tell about ourselves, the dreams we have of our of ourselves, of our lives, of the universe that of which we are part. That leads to two thoughts. One, that in a certain sense, we can be trapped in the wrong stories. And at the same time, the second thought being that we can tell new stories, and that there's a great privilege in being a filmmaker, and that I get to tell stories that change how we see ourselves. And I think, the end in that sense is a cautionary tale. It's in which it ends tragically for the family. It's too late for the last human family in a bunker at the end, but it's not too late for us. Even if our situation is very grave at the moment, there's still time for us to come together in our families, and especially as a human family, and look honestly at our mistakes, so that we can change them, so that we can change course.
Yeah, I like that answer. Do you find yourself as someone who has a more kind of optimistic view on humanity and like our ability to change our ways, and our ability to sort of forgive ourselves and to forgive each other, which, I think is another sort of really fascinating idea at play both in this movie and in your documentary work that I really admire?
Yeah, I absolutely, I guess so. Yeah, I maybe wouldn't use the word optimist because that implies a kind of faith or confidence that things will work out for the best. And I think that then there's a slippery slope from that to the kind of deluded hope that says no matter what, things will work out for the best, which is what the film is precisely what the film is questioning. The idea that um, we that no matter what happens, our future is bright. It's exactly what the family's desperately trying to convince themselves of at the very end as they stare off into the abyss. Um, and I think that's the kind of false hope of Wile E. Coyote who runs off the edge of the cliff and just says, I'll just keep going. But I think that I think in our language, we fail often to distinguish between two types of hope. There's that false hope, and then there's the genuine hope that um, we can change. And this film is an act of that kind of genuine hope. And I think not just from me, but from the entire cast and the over 100, 100 plus people in the crew. We all came together with the conviction that yes, it may be too late for this family, but it's not too late for the audience.
So I want to get into sort of the specifics of kind of how you made the film. Like where did this concept even kind of come from? It's such a kind of like one of those like fun elevator pitch ideas. Like when I first heard about it, of like, oh, it's a musical about a family at the end of the world and in the middle of was there sort of like, has this been the story that's kind of always been with you that you've sort of been tinkering with, or is there sort of like one moment clearly in your life or in the world that sort of really made this project kind of crystallize all together?
Yeah, there was a moment, and it it also connects to my earlier work. I wanted to make a third film in Indonesia with some of the billionaires who really rule the country and obtain their wealth by taking advantage of a public that was terrified of them because they'd participated in or sponsored genocide. And after the act of killing came out, I could not safely return to Indonesia and indeed still can't. And so I started investigating oligarchs elsewhere. And there was one oil tycoon from another country in Asia who had obtained his oil concessions through mass violence in the area, in the villages and communities around his oil fields. And his family, it turned out, was on the market for a bunker. Actually, the father was into life, wanted to live forever. So he had a whole host of sort of immortality projects around his legacy. He was investing in all these life-extending medicines that he hoped would prove effective while he was still young enough to benefit from them. But another thing he was doing was shopping for a bunker for his family. And we went looking at a bunker that was still unfinished, but was sort of the shell for a facility much like the one in the film. And I just was dying to ask these questions that I didn't really know them well enough to ask directly. How would you cope with your remorse for the catastrophe from which you would be fleeing? How would you cope with your grief around leaving loved ones behind? How would you tell your story to your grandchildren? They envisioned potentially, if the global situation deteriorated sufficiently, of remaining in the bunker and creating a new generation in the bunker. How would you tell your grandchildren your story, and how would that be a way of whitewashing your past so that you could live in peace with yourself? And um, I felt like, God, the film I'd like to be making with this family is not them buying the bunker, but them living in the bunker trapped in the prison of these dilemmas 25 years after the world had ended. And I inevitably wouldn't be making that. So on the way home, to get some distance on the whole issue, I watched on the airplane was one of my very favorite films, which is The Umbrellas of Cherbourg by Jacques Demy, just to sort of clear my head and get distance, as I said. And it just came to me. I was like, I mean, this is not, there are many different differences between the Umbrellas of Cherbourg and the end, but both refer back to a kind of golden age of the American musical, where these kind of bouncy, buoyant musicals held a nation together. And I thought, what does it mean to revisit this form at a time when nothing holds, neither the nation nor our shared sense of truth and reality, nor even the biosphere that sustains life. And I felt the family should be American because this is a quintessentially American genre. The title should be The End, and it should be set 25 years after the family moved in. And it all came to me as a kind of epiphany, which is maybe, and then just remained to be fleshed out over a very long and thoughtful, I think, process.
So how did you then go about kind of like, working to figure out kind of what the songs would be, as well as sort of getting the cast on board with people like Tilda Swinton and Michael Shannon and George McKay, who are all great in the film. And I'm also curious, like, with you having such an experience with documentary work, how much are you sort of like communicating with the actors in terms of sort of like the themes and ideas of the film and some of that sort of self-reflection that we talked about versus kind of like letting them sort of find their own sort of psychology and way into the story and then kind of like capturing that in a naturalistic form?
Yeah. Although I had a consulting composer on board very early who ended up not being the one to write the music, she had said, try to spot the songs as you write the script and get a sense, just an instinctive sense of what gets the character singing. And that led me to sort of just instinctively start placing the songs, which when then I had a whole script with a whole suite of songs placed, I could then analyze and say, what is really the principle that gets them singing? And that's when I realized that it is these crises of doubt, that these moments of awkwardness where the truth has burst through somehow, where the illusion is cracking and they desperately have to patch it up or reach for a whole new melody to sing their truth in order to sort of find equilibrium again. And that principle evolved, that didn't come as an abstract idea, that came through sort of instinct. Where does it feel like they should sing? I think that's really the nature of vision, honestly, as a creator, that you have instincts and then afterwards you kind of make sense of them. And then that analytical process, at least with me, allows me to become more precise and to refine. The fact that the songs emerged from these crises of doubt meant that I needed a cast who were so brilliant that they could sort of effortlessly draw from their inner life and manifest on the sort of screen of their faces every flicker of doubt, remorse, dread, longing, in part so that the spoken dialogue could be so that the capacity for subtext available to the spoken dialogue in the spoken dialogue could be fulfilled, so that it would be fully earned when they break through that into song. And that meant that, that just led me to Tilda. I just sort of knew, oh, she's absolutely the person I hope will play the mother, and she's also intrepid enough to do so. And likewise, George, Michael, I knew I wanted a slightly different tone in the actor playing girl. I wanted someone who's very natural, not performative, because unlike the rest of the cast, she's not coming in, she's not performing a version of herself every day until the very end of the film. So I wanted a slightly different tone. And I wanted eyes that hold secrets. And I felt there was something in Moses's eyes that hold a depth of sadness, so that when she tells us the source of her trauma, or what she thinks is the source of her trauma, we sort of feel there's 1,000 layers of pain and longing and sadness and grief beneath that she is maybe not even aware of. And so that was how I approached the casting. And then I also knew from the way those songs were placed, from the principle that I'd understood through the placing of through the writing of the songs that the vocals would have to be live, um, because we'd be filming emotional breakdowns. When the songs are at their most intense, we'd be filming breakdowns in song. And that meant that the songs would not be these musical extravaganza fantasy numbers. We'd be bearing witness to the character in crisis. And I thought there was nothing more radiantly vulnerable and beautiful than the honest voice of the character in crisis. And so I knew I wasn't looking for polished professional singers. I was looking for people who had the right voice for the part. Tilda has this fragility in her, and who were musical, but
Mhm.
not Broadway singers. And Tilda has this fragile quality, which was just perfect for someone who's desperately trying to reassemble her armor in a way. She's like Humpty Dumpty trying to put herself back together again, and especially in her big song The Mirror. So that was how I approached the casting. And then I was very, we had a month of rehearsal where we could all be as transparent as we wished about how the story resonated with us personally. I tend to share and disclose personal experiences that um, from which I was writing. And not because I hope the cast, and I was very clear about this, not because I hope the cast will take those on as their own, though perhaps some of them did, but as an invitation for them to dig that deep into their own histories. And I think that that openness from all of us that we brought to the rehearsal process, and the sense of communion that we had created in that month of rehearsal, created this incredible commitment, bodily, physical commitment from the cast, each cast member, to the piece and to each other, such that I feel like when you see the film, it's not like you're watching a committed troupe or ensemble. It's as if you're watching members of a doomsday cult who've signed up for the rapture, and
Mhm.
they're hopeful, and they're lost, and they're sort of shockingly mortal. And we're in the transition from working in fiction, working in documentary to fiction. I grew up in a family where there was divorce, and I was the youngest, and somehow my role was to just, my way of coping with it was to sort of reassure my mother that her version of the story was right, and reassuring my father that his version of the story was right. And of course, was it was not possible that those stories were equally true all the time, because they were, these were two conflicting narratives. And I think I kind of lost myself in that um in the gap. Then I became something of a pleaser, I think. That serves me at times, and making documentary, it um I would often, my method is to create these conditions where everyone, including me, is pushed beyond our comfort zone within the overall safe space of making a film, in the hope of illuminating the themes that I'm trying to explore through the film. And I'm always looking, I'm in a sense always trying to create conditions where something unexpected happens, where something that I sort of recognize as true because it's not what I expect.
Mm.
And films are The Act of Killing and The Look of Silence are composed almost entirely, probably entirely, out of these anomalies that emerge from these situations that I would co-create with the participants. And I think for me, being in a process where we became a family that was as fully honest with each other as we wanted to be, and yet where we could maintain in privacy and secrets whenever we needed to, and that was also fully respected. The kind of transparency of that was a kind of very belated coming of age for me, very fulfilling. And once we had done that groundwork as a troupe, on set, I found And once we'd worked through the very long, complex, once we'd worked through the sort of technical demands of singing live and dancing and long choreographed takes, which is how the songs are shot. They're all in these long single takes. Once we worked through all that, I was able to I quickly learned that I could step back and trust these impossibly brilliant collaborators to draw from their inner lives and their own, whatever they wanted from the kind of fertilizer of rehearsal and the seeds that were planted in rehearsal to explore and make these characters come alive. And then the process was sort of surprisingly, in many ways, similar to documentary, and that I could let them bring me gifts, bring me surprises, let them bring me these moments that are not that I instantly recognized as authentic because they were not what I envisioned when I was writing or even in rehearsal. And that was beautiful, to have all the live exploration of documentary, but with the full communion and closeness of artists, each working in different ways to realize a vision.
I want to ask, like, is there one of those moments that like immediately comes to you? One of those sort of like unexpected magic moments that just sort of happened while you guys were shooting?
It's literally the whole movie. I mean, every scene has that, or else I would keep going. We'd keep going in our takes. And one that I'll just tell you is, in the pursuit of that, Tilda and I developed a little code word, which was shellless. Because we were always, whenever one of us felt that we could go deeper toward this sort of molting creature, vulnerable, traumatized woman who's reaching for some fragment of armor to protect herself from her own trauma and her own ghosts. Whenever we felt we could go deeper, either she or I would whisper after a take, shellless, which meant let's keep shooting. And we would just keep doing takes. And and Tilda would approach those takes like a sandbox, kind of just playing and getting deeper and deeper into an almost fugue state. And the last take was always extraordinary because she would sort of muster all of her. When you tell her this is the last one, we don't have time for more, she would muster everything, marshal everything she'd explored and sort of bring everything that was still relevant and true out. Not consciously, it just would become embodied by that point. And when she sings her song her big aria in the bathroom and then in the cave, the piece in the bathroom must be one of the most complicated pieces of dramatic songwriting that has ever been performed and composed. And that's her 31st take.
Wow.
We cleared the whole afternoon for her to do that. And by take 5, it was exquisite. It was amazing. By take 15, it was like interesting and wild, but things were starting to fall apart because she was exhausted. It's 3 minutes. And I was like, okay, we have it. It's beautiful. And she just whispered again, shellless. Let's keep going. Let's use this afternoon. And I was like, okay. And I knew that something would happen on the last take. So when we reached take 30, at the end of take 30, I went in and I was like, okay, Tilda, we have one more. And she just does this kind of bow, almost to honor the moment. And okay, this is the last one. And then out came this performance that's just so shockingly human and so heartbreaking that, having seen it hundreds of times, obviously, it still makes me cry almost every time I see it. And I think in there lies the message of the film. In a certain way, what was beautiful about this way of working, and what I hope to continue with in my own work as a filmmaker, was this coming together with this honesty and this creativity and this common vision for life. And I hope that's the message of the film, is that it's not too late for all of us to try and do that.